2021. That's the kickoff meeting, the Patient Engagement Open Forum. And so it was really, really nice to, as part of preparation discussion, but also seeing the number of registrations, to actually see the enthusiasm and the willingness to actually get back on track patient engagement and move forward. It's a very special day today for us as the organizers, because that's the first Patient Engagement Open Forum after Paradigm. And just to give you a little bit of context, what's happening today is actually something that was designed for the first time 4 or 5 years ago, when the public and private consortium of Paradigm were actually meeting to prepare the final proposal and discussing about what could be one of the legacy of Paradigm after Paradigm. And that's where we started to shape what's the Patient Engagement Open Forum that you will experience today. And that's the first time that actually we continue after the IMI phase of the project, and that we make it work to continue to co-create and shape the future of patient engagement. So what makes the Patient Engagement Open Forum completely unique? That's the co-creation element. And as you know, consultation is actually the lowest level of co-creation. And so what we are trying to do with this forum is actually give a platform for all the projects that would like to engage patients or co-create solutions together, to actually have a moment where we can meet a quite large audience. So we have registration in hundreds for every single of the session for the next 2 days. Actually, we will explore what it is to co-create virtually with several hundred people on the line. And so that's something that also you should take into account. So be mindful for the moderators, for the speakers, for the team managing the chat and so on, that actually we are many peoples, and we really want to make sure that the whole experience is efficient and also enjoyable for everybody. So now let's look at the agenda for the next 2 days. In terms of content, we have to start somewhere, and I will explain you why I made that comment a little bit later. But we have to start with the key topics we know we have to discuss for patient engagement. So later today, in the pure spirit of continuity of Paradigm and co-creation, actually, we will discuss on how we can bring the metrics framework of Paradigm one step further. And actually, the key focus is how can we make it actionable? How can we make sure we adopt it? How we can make sure we practice it? That's for the session after the reflection and shaping the future of patient engagement session. It will be at 4:30 European time today. And tomorrow we have 2 sessions, one on patient engagements in digital health. How can we shape, what is the agenda there? What are the key topics? What is at stake? And how should we co-create solutions for the future? And finally, tomorrow as well, a key topic, a strategic topic for patient engagement. When it comes to patient engagement, we want to make sure there is evidence next to this patient engagement. And there is the topic of patient experience data. How to best reflect the patient experience for decision makers, but also for researchers and so on. And there will be a whole topic with great speakers on all of our sessions. So before I pass it on to Maria from Yvette to continue welcoming you, I just wanted to actually tell you what will happen a little bit in this first session. We will have Yvette acknowledge what we all went through from a patient perspective, but also taking into account all the stakeholders at the table. And then from there, we will have Neil Bertelsen from HCI, who will actually help our panelists and moderate the discussion to actually give the perspective from their stakeholder point of view, with Christine, Stuart, and Magda, reflecting different perspectives around patient engagement and what we have experienced last year and the last 12 months, but also how to move forward. And from there, since we want to really co-create together with you, we will actually start shaping the agenda of 2021 together. So today and tomorrow are the first 2 dates for this year. There will be another 6 dates. The next ones are in June. And we want to hear from you, what are the key topics? What are the key elements? What are the issues we can solve together with patient engagement? And so that's actually the goal of this session. Is not only to introduce PEOF 2021, it's also to shape it together moving forward. And that will be a first step of co-creation. Now, before I leave it to Maria, I just wanted to insist that we used, in the last few years, we used this analogy of the village. And that actually this forum is the village of patient engagement. And so I just want to ensure to insist on the fact that the bigger this community is, the bigger we engage our colleagues, the people in our respective networks, the most we invite them to these sessions, the most influence we have for patient engagement good practices. So please make sure that actually not only you come to benefit from it and to influence patient engagement, but you also make sure you share that experience with your colleagues, whatever stakeholder groups you belong to. And now, Maria, I'm super happy to give you the voice to tell a bit more about the Patient Engagement Open Forum.
Thank you, Nicola. And I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We are launching this year's Open Forum in these unprecedented circumstances. But despite this, we see that the patient engagement community continues to advance and innovate. And therefore, the overall theme for our sessions this year is towards stronger patient engagement. It's about continuing to build even a stronger community and to foster meaningful involvement of patients at each step of the medicines R&D process. And we are convinced that the only way to achieve stronger impact is through working together, as Nicola mentioned, in this collaborative spirit that characterizes the open forum and helps to break silos. So let's look at our registered participants and who we are. And this, you can see our community, this village, as we refer to, is growing and is very diverse. On this slide, you can see the variety of stakeholders and regions of the world that are represented among the registered participants this week. So we have patient advocates, patient organizations, academic researchers, professionals from the healthcare industry, representatives from HTA bodies, nonprofits and international organizations, and many other stakeholders present. All of us are important, and together we can make patient engagement the new norm through creating new tools, recommendations, good practices, and frameworks. And I would also like to emphasize that the open forum is about learning together, sharing information and building our capacity. So I would also like to promote it as an excellent training opportunity for everyone working in this field. Next slide, please. So before getting started, let's go through some housekeeping rules for our sessions today. You are welcome to stay engaged and active. Also, because for the first time ever, as already mentioned, you will be able to work together to contribute to the agenda of the open forum this year. All microphones will be muted. You are welcome to provide your questions, comments, and feedback in the Q&A box. Your question will be shown with your name, and please be respectful to others as you would in a live meeting. Unfortunately, we are many participants today and are not able to answer all questions, but we will keep these and take them further to the program committee and use them in shaping the future sessions. The session is also recorded and will be shared on our website. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Yvette Jacob, who will provide a keynote address. She is a patient advocate president of the Epf Youth Group, also UPATI Fellow and a faculty member at the Syrian Research Institute in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I would like to give a very warm welcome to everyone as well. And I would like to start my speech with introducing you these beautiful people behind me, the Epf Youth Group. We are a very diverse group of young patients from 12 different countries from within Europe, from 12 different chronic conditions, working together now more virtually than ever to strengthen the young patient's voice within Europe. But in my day-to-day life, I'm also working as a researcher in health economics. So I usually joke with being a health economist by day and a patient advocate by night, hoping that it gives me kind of Batman vibes, but apparently it's not giving me Batman vibes, only workaholic vibes, and I don't like that. So I think this was the last time I've used this example. So in my health economics world, I also find myself on both ends of the patient engagement. And my personal mission is to get the perspectives of different stakeholders in healthcare closer together by finding that really core human connection that at the end of the day, and I don't want to go to very philosophical deeps, but at the end of the year, the day we are only people who chose different career paths, or it was chosen for us in our life stories. So as our session's name today is a time to reflect and move forward, I started with some reflection. If we go for my first slide, you can see I looked into my phone because I had the privilege to attend the first patient engagement open forum in 2019, and I found some really fun and some great pictures of us sitting all together in the same room, sharing some Belgian beers, and it got me really, really nostalgic. And then I looked for pictures in my phone of the patient engagement open forum in 2020. So if we go to the next slide, that's a very boring picture of my balcony. So what happened between the two? It's quite evident for everyone. All the health crisis, all the things we see now that are caused directly by COVID and indirectly as well. The mental health crisis we are approaching, the economic crisis, how we are now confronted more than ever with the level of health literacy of the societies and how it could and should be much higher. The importance of risk communication and the importance of translating science to people has never been so evident, not in my lifetime for sure. So while all these bad things are around, I also found that if we go to the next slide, what really, if I had to phrase in a sentence 2020 for me, it's connecting while being apart. And we've connected with our families, friends, our colleagues in our personal and professional lives, but we were also struggling, and sometimes doing it more better than other times. We were struggling with keeping our communities together. A big part of a patient organization's work usually is peer-to-peer support and is really just being together in the same room. And we had to find ways to solve that and to do that virtually. But we also had to connect between stakeholders. So patient engagement had to happen. I hope it happened just as much as before, but I think we will have some views on that later on in the perspective panel. So we had to find new ways to connect. And with all the experience we had in 2020 about connecting, I'm really hoping 2021 in a sentence will be connecting meaningfully while being apart. And you might say now, but Yvette, this pandemic, or at least the heavy part of it will go away in months. Why would we talk about things that we won't need afterwards? It's because I believe there are skills that we gained that shouldn't go away, that should stick with us even after we don't necessarily have to use them. So what are these? Go to the next slide. So what my grandma usually says is there's something good in every bad. So I try to look at small little good things in what COVID brought to us. And I think if only temporarily, it gave us a greater appreciation of health, of healthcare, of our human connections and the time well spent. And this might be a bit personal, but what I see, especially for young patients as they go into advocacy, that the more successful they get in their advocacy, the more time they spend with their advocacy, the less time they have to care about their own health and mental health. And I think this is just a very paradox way to be a patient advocate and then don't care about your health. And where it peaked for me especially was traveling. So I've been to countless times in 2019 on trips to Brussels and everywhere around Europe for work and for advocacy, whereas maybe not all of them were necessary. And while I was by the end trying to reflect on which are the meaningful invites that I should accept and which are the ones that I should say no to, COVID really gave me personally a lot of my time back. But who am I to complain? Because I could travel. I have very understanding employers. I don't have to care full time for any other person. My health state allows me to travel and go to places, but there are people who are not. So I believe COVID also gave us the opportunity to hear voices we haven't heard or we haven't heard as much before. Caregivers, don't even get me started on how important it is to involve caregivers into conversations on behalf of their own perspectives and not only as a dummy for the patient, because they are just as influenced by the disease a lot of times as their patients. Also, people living in rural areas, people who cannot access travel, these people were automatically left out up until this point, and now they are not. There's some increase in the numbers as I've seen, for example, for the summer training for young patient advocates organized by EPF, when it turned out it will be virtual in 2020, we could accept more patients. So it was more opportunity to learn. And we've also, as the Epf Youth Group, got invitations to events, multi-stakeholder events, which we have never before. So I'm hoping on these virtual events, we proved our point to be there even when and if it gets face-to-face again. And the last point, I couldn't put it in a better way, it's sharing real-life experience internationally. So we could also attend those meetings who were intended to be country-specific. A good example, because I'm in health economics, I'm very interested in health technology assessment and patient involvement in HTA. And what's really challenging about HTA that it's very country specific, and which came to me by a surprise, though it shouldn't, that patient involvement in HTA is very country specific as well, even if two countries use the same method seemingly, or the nuances make it very different experience. So I had the chance last year in March to be in Australia by incident at the time of a meeting like this there, and I could attend, and it was very insightful. I could see both sides of the story, could go really deep into how it is working in there. And then just 7 months later, there was a very similar event in Canada, which was streamed. So I could access that, although before the pandemic, I should have been in Canada to be able to do that. So in a way, it's really opened up the word. And I think we will talk a lot about in the perspectives panel how the different biases and the Zoom fatigue, so all the negative sides of it. And I do admit there are some, but we should keep in mind that there were some positives to this balance as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, what I really wanted to talk about today is these nuances of social interactions. And I recently read a book called The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker. And I tried to read it with a mindset of translating the learnings to our context now. So number 0, and it's not on the slide, is the mindset. Whenever I have to organize something and I'm inviting patients or caregivers, the number 1 thing I do is to set in the right mindset. What do I mean by that? I always ground myself and think about who am I to get 2 hours, 5 hours, 15 hours of this person's time without having a real impact. So time is the most important thing we have. It's even more important if you or someone you love is a patient. Our diseases take away a lot of time, not only in terms of the therapies and the symptoms, but also in the future in terms of survival. So asking for their time is really, really a meaningful, and you are asking for the biggest thing they have. So I always stop for a minute and get the right mindset that whatever we get to by the end of the project, focus group, or whatever we are doing together, it should have an impact and it should be aligned by their purposes. So if I have that, my mindset set, then the first thing is to find the real need, and by the real need, a clear purpose. And that's why I really like later on with Neil, we will have an interactive session co-creating the topics for future events like this, because we need to, so the best way to find out the need is asking people what they need. So you will be asked, and then you will have the chance to prioritize these needs and to really define a very clear purpose for the future. The second one is priming attendees. An event is not starting when it is starting. So this event didn't start at 2:30 CET. It started way before when you got the invitation, especially if you want meaningful patient engagement activities, you need to prime the attendees. Pre-readings in the language it's accessible for them in lay language. I don't know, any kind of video materials, getting the questions, getting what will be discussed on the event is very important if you want to get real perspectives and if you want to get real engagement. The third one is clear expectations from both ends. So I want to know before I ever accept any invitation for an engagement process or whatever that kind, I want to know how long it will take for me, what's the purpose, whether I get remunerated or not. These are important questions by now, and they're really good examples. For example, I think EUPATY has a really good template for this, and us as EUPATY fellows get the same structured information about any open call that is out there for patients. But of course, as a patient, I can ask as well, what is making this engagement process meaningful? How do you ensure this to be meaningful and serve the purpose? How long will it take? So this is a two-way street. The fourth one is grounding rules. Rules can be liberating. I know it sounds crazy, kind of, but rules are great, or they can be great. A good example, I've been involved in a multi-stakeholder conference, and we had several breakout sessions. And in each breakout session, there was a patient representative. And there was a rule for the facilitator that the patient representative should be asked first. And I knew this way ahead. I knew the questions that would be asked way ahead, so I could prepare. And the conversation just really got going on this first impression, and the other stakeholders could react to what the patient said. But another enabling rule can be starting a 3-hour meeting with telling people that they can eat, drink, turn off their cameras if they wish, leave for a short break. So really just enabling them to be comfortable in their body while attending our events. The fifth one is generous exclusion. I might not be very popular with this one, but I like to get controversial sometimes. So having more people is not always better. If you have the capacities, the time to spend to meaningfully involve 5 patients or 5 people, then you shouldn't do 15 that you don't have the capacities to do and don't have the capacity to have a meeting with each of them previously. So more people is not always better. And of course, you don't need to invite for a meaningful event. You don't have to always invite the people you have to invite. So keep in mind the diversity and keep in mind that to invite people who will have an actual impact on the outcome and not just because they were always invited, they should be invited now as well. And the 6th one is a clear ending. So whenever you have a progress like this, there should be a clear ending. And of course, feedback is highlighted in all guidelines. Giving feedback on how it was useful or how it was not useful or could be useful in the future is really, really valuable for us. Next slide, please. So I would like to finish with telling you how we get meaning, how we connect meaningfully with the youth group. Half of these people I have never met in person, and yet we were able to build lasting relationships and we are able to get honest with each other. And I think this is in a great part thanks to Borislava's or Epf Youth Group coordinator's invention, which is the honesty round. So after every big meeting, we have an honesty round and everyone shares their frustrations, feelings, anything that comes up. And I believe our world really needs a lot more honesty rounds. And in a way, you've just heard my honesty round. So my take-home message is, if we go to the next slide, is that 2020 proved to us that connecting meaningfully from a distance is not easy, but possible. And from this point on, we should find a new, more meaningful and more inclusive normal. And we shouldn't go back to how things were done in 2019. Is it hybrid events? Probably. We should, when we can, we should start experimenting with having events which are face-to-face, but both streamed to the people who couldn't travel there. Or is it, and there's another big burden we need to still, a barrier we need to still solve. And this is a very futuristic, or not as futuristic thought, is the language. So now we are only those people who could access this event who know English. And maybe AI, artificial intelligence, will get to a level when live translation gets much more accessible. And I'm hoping that will mean a good way, a new way of involving a lot of voices that we don't hear now and should be heard. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I give the floor to Neil Bertelsen from the HTI Patient and Citizen Involvement Interest Group for the stakeholder perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Yvette. And it was really interesting. I was making lots of notes as you were speaking, Yvette, and I've just taken, just to pull out some themes that Yvette flagged up before we go to our panelists is, there was a thing about bringing the perspectives together. That's exactly what we're trying to do in this forum, is make sure that we have diverse perspectives we're bringing together. And I love the way, Yvette, that you were thinking about the difference between connecting people, just having a group that meets together, and connecting meaningfully. And you gave us a lot of examples and some ideas of how we can ensure that each of our engagements are more meaningful as we go forward. So we could hear from your perspectives and your personal perspectives of how different the last year has been for you. But you have been thinking about, well, what does that mean going forward? What do we take into the future that allows us to maintain this inclusivity and keeps the diversity that we're able to enjoy when everything is virtual? So you pose some really interesting questions, Yvette, and I thank you very much for that. So as Yvette said, I'm Neil Bertelsen from the HTAI Patient and Citizens Involvement Group. And I'd like to hear from some more perspectives now. And so what I'm going to suggest is that we hear from Christine Schneemann, who's the director of Faster Cures, to get another set of perspectives around what have we reflected on from the past year and what can we take forward. So Christine, I'll just pass over to you straight away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kristen Schneemann. I'm a director at Faster Cures. And thank you all to the organizers for having me and inviting us, and to all the attendees for your participation. And thank you, Yvette, for those beautifully articulated opening comments. And I hope that some of mine may, in a small way, resonate with some of the themes that you've already raised. For those of you who don't know Faster Cures, we are a center of the US-based Milken Institute. Our mission is identifying and removing barriers to faster biomedical innovation. Patient organizations have always been core to our work for reasons I won't go into here. But over the years, we have engaged with a broad community of patient-driven foundations that are innovators in how they help their patient communities engage in the research process and how they deploy their funding to accelerate more treatments and better outcomes for their patients. So as we know, the title of the session is a time to reflect and move forward. So I will also first offer some reflections based on our conversations with many of these organizations over the last year. COVID-19 obviously presented tough challenges, but also some critical opportunities for disease organizations. These organizations are a critical source of patient support, services, and funding to advance a range of research and treatments. But after this difficult year, many are stressed along with the patients they represent. First of all, revenues for many of them have plunged, and they have had to let employees go. These resource constraints are possibly the first domino in a chain reaction that will impact patient care today and cures for tomorrow. Second, the patients they serve are having their care disrupted. I'm sure many of you have seen data from various sources that people across the globe are experiencing partial or complete disruptions in care for conditions like hypertension, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular emergencies, and on and on. The impacts of care delayed or denied will likely be felt for years to come. Third, clinical trials have been put on hold. For patients with conditions for which no approved treatment exists, clinical trials sometimes become the only hope. Thousands of non-COVID clinical trials were stopped during the pandemic, taking away care options for today, as well as the potential of new treatments for tomorrow. And finally, critical non-COVID medical research has been stalled in many cases or even stopped. And restarting those projects will take not only time, but additional funding and resources. At the same time, kind of echoing some of Yvette's comments, as in all other aspects of our lives, this crisis has made us reach deep into our wells of creativity in ways perhaps we didn't know we were capable of. Much of that creativity has involved the use of digital tools like the ones we're using today, which has allowed patient organizations to experiment with new fundraising methods, sometimes quite successfully, and to serve their patients' needs in virtual forums. Again, Yvette spoke about some of this. In some cases, it has allowed them to reach patients that they had not been able to engage previously. And we are perhaps, in the US at least, maybe beginning to feel we can think about the future and move forward. We've heard from the patient organizations in our network some key lessons from the COVID experience that they say will have an impact, they believe, on their missions and activities into the future. And I'm going to share just 3 of those quickly. First of all, we've seen and they've seen that we can innovate in ways that speed the process of medical innovation when we have to. COVID-19 has shown us that we can make medical research faster and more people-centered at the same time. Treatments and vaccines are being developed at a record pace. Governments are enabling innovative approaches, particularly in the use of digital tools in areas like telemedicine, informed consent, and remote participation in clinical trials that have been talked about for years, but never implemented as we're seeing them now. Many patient communities are urgently advocating that we not let those lessons and advances be lost and old habits and practices return. Again, echoing something that Yvette very eloquently raised. The second kind of area of focus, I think, for many organizations going forward is that mental health is the tie that binds us all together. Whether or not you have a pre-existing medical condition, living through this pandemic has exposed for virtually all of us the centrality of mental wellness and its links to physical health. Anxiety and depression often go hand in hand with and exacerbate all of the primary conditions that patient organizations are seeking to address. There is a fresh recognition that we all need to work together to improve mental health research and outcomes for patients, and collaborate to support more and better research and care in this area. And then finally, in the US, certainly, racial and ethnic inequities in research and care have been graphically laid bare. We must all do better at considering how we can address these inequities wherever they lie and engage underserved communities in everything we do in our organizations, including patient organizations. We must consider whether the information and services we provide are reaching those who need them most, and how they are integrated in our activities and decision-making. We can partner with community-based individuals and organizations to extend our reach and effectiveness. Patient foundations need to consider whether the work they support is representative and inclusive of those who bear the burden of the disease. Here again, the use of digital tools can be an asset, but we must be especially careful that the digital divide does not create even greater inequities. I'm going to stop there for now. I hope these have been useful reflections, and I look forward to my fellow panelists' comments and the dialogue afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Kristin. And it's interesting. I think you raised some really clear positives and negatives from this period of time. So I heard you very clearly several times talking about this has spurred innovation. The COVID crisis has spurred innovation in lots of different ways. But it's also created a lot of disruption about care, disruption about finances for patient groups. But it has shown that innovation is possible at speed. So we've seen this accelerated innovation. But you also raised some really interesting points here about the COVID crisis illuminating some issues that have been long-standing issues that have really come to the fore because of the situation we're in, such as the racial and ethnic inequities that have been really highlighted due to COVID. And I'm sure we'll pull on that as we go through the rest of the session and think about what we can do about some of those things. And just to let everybody know how we're going to run the next sessions is we'll listen to each of our stakeholder perspectives, and we'll pull in conversations from each of those stakeholders as we go through the co-creation exercise. So let me now move to our next stakeholder, who is Stuart Faulkner, who's going to give us the perspectives from the academic, the research community of what we need to be thinking about, what we need to be reflecting on from the past year and taking forward as we go forward. So Stuart, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. And yeah, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Stuart Faulkner. I'm from University of Oxford. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I was lucky enough to be involved in the Paradigm project that was the forebearer of the Patient Engagement Open Forum here. So I'm very excited that this platform can continue, that we can continue to share and co-create our joint learnings. So some reflections from myself, and I think I can pick up a couple of points that Kristin just pointed out there. From a research perspective, you know, it's well documented the disruption to sort of clinical trials and clinical research that's occurred over the last year, with many being paused or suspended, and the disruption in restarting those. But also, Kristin pointed out the effect on sort of non-clinical research pretty much across the board. You know, everything has been delayed, affected that way, and within that context, the research, the day-to-day research that does involve patient engagement or patient and public involvement, you know, has also been affected. We've had to delay what we do, we've had to modify what we do, we've had to suspend what we do, and in some cases we've had to you know, drop elements of that patient engagement. And I think one example that really highlights that potential issue is where there is research that has had a specific sort of COVID focus that has been prioritized as such. Part of that process is the research has been compressed, timelines have been compressed. You know, a normal sort of 2 or 3 year project has now been prioritized down to sort of 6 or 12 months. And so in the rush to get that science done and in rush to complete those studies, there's been concern from many quarters that, you know, unfortunately, patient engagement has rather been moved to the back of the queue here, and in some cases dropped off the agenda entirely. So that's one reflection where you know, things have not gone so well. And picking up another point about where we've reflected upon it, it really has is how we do patient engagement really has, again, I think, brought to the fore a number of considerations that have been there for many years about how we improve or enhance inclusivity in our patient engagement, those hard to reach populations, and that has really given the sort of shot in the arm to really critically look at the processes, our community, about how we approach this, and trying to find some solutions as how we can improve that in how we do our research moving forward. And then picking up on the flip side of that, the opportunities and moving forward, picking up from what Yvette talked about earlier, I agree. I think the current pandemic has really presented a whole host of new opportunities about how we can better engage patients. I mean, pretty much overnight, we've shifted from fairly standard ways of engaging patients, you know, via face-to-face mechanisms, to pretty much overnight shifting all of that into a sort of remote and virtual setting. And that has presented great opportunities to improve, you know, really engaging with, you know, vulnerable, unaffiliated patient populations, extending that sort of geographical reach, and also perhaps better fulfilling that sort of long-standing mantra of sort of involving the right patient at the right time, and really bringing that patient engagement to the patient rather than the patient coming to patient engagement. I think for me, one issue that this big shift from face-to-face interactions to virtual interactions that really is interesting to look at from a research perspective is what has been the impact from that on patient engagement as a whole. There are a number of interesting questions that we can, I think, now look at is, well, you know, under what circumstances is it optimal and appropriate to undertake patient engagement in our sort of tried and tested sort of face-to-face format? Or what circumstances is it optimal and appropriate now to have patient engagement entirely remote or virtually? And then the really tricky one that is sort of Yvette picked up on is that sort of hybrid model somewhere in the middle. I think there's a number of sort of quite interesting sort of ethical questions that are coming up around this, a number of sort of governance questions, issues around sort of privacy, of not only talking about sort of personal data protection, but also the privacy of physically coming into somebody's front room, coming into their home environment. That can change the whole dynamics of the interaction and really change some of the power dynamics about how those engagement activities go on. So I think moving forward, there's some really interesting questions that now that a year has passed, we've had time to reflect, I think we can really bring some of those learnings together from the different stakeholder groups and really understand where some of those nuances can be looked at from a research perspective, and really sort of feed into this evolving and strengthening patient engagement moving forward. And I think just to finish my speaking now, I think my sort of forward reflections are, I think with this increased opportunities that the pandemic has afforded us, also comes increased responsibility that we continue to make patient engagement front and center. It continues to be meaningful, and it continues to be fit for purpose. So I will stop there.
Thank you ever so much, Stuart. And you know, again, you've added some new really interesting points to the mix about the rush the rush with all the COVID research. And it's interesting, I was looking at this just the other day with in the UK, the National Institute of Health Research did an analysis and looked at patient engagement in health research pre-COVID, and then during that first 6 or so months of COVID. And they saw that research projects that involved patients dropped by a massive 70%. You know, what's interesting there is that they managed to turn those figures around with the right support. But we see that in the figures. We see that challenge of speedy research. The researchers assume that you can't have patient involvement, patient engagement in there because it will slow it down too much. But we also see that that's definitely not true. And you also raise these really interesting points about how we can understand more about the different methods of engagement in this new world, not just during now when a lot of people are still in lockdown, but as we move forward and we start to have things like hybrid meetings, what does that mean? How inclusive it is, or how exclusive is that? And what are the governance, privacy, and the ethics around all of those things? So I'm sure that will feed into a lot of the ideas that we have when we get into our co-creation session. But let's move on, last but not least, from our stakeholder perspectives. Let me hand over now to Magda Chibas from FPR. So it's over to you now, Magda.
Thank you very much, Neil. And it's really a privilege to be speaking after two great speakers who actually said it all. So what's left for me? Well, I think inspired by Yvette, I would say my honesty round. So let me be a little bit building on what both Christine and Stuart said. So first, looking back, I think we have created in the last 2 years, and I'm not looking only at the COVID and the health crisis period, but over the last 2 years, we have created a lot of practical tools that enable meaningful engagement. Of course, the COVID situation and everything that both Christine and Stuart outline are requiring for us to adapt those tools to those new circumstances and to do maybe slightly differently, but still those tools do exist. We have also created a lot of methods to integrate patients' insights, patient voice into decision-making at the level of companies' decisions, at the level of evidence generation, and in the regulatory and HTA world. So methodologies do exist. We have also created the community, the village that Nicola was talking about at the beginning. And last year, at the last Patient Engagement Open Forum, we've all made a commitment that now we are going to do things, not only create them, but to do them. And I think my honesty round and my plea now is that there is no excuse anymore. We just need to do the steps, to be brave, to get out of our comfort zone. And it's very comfortable to continue creating rather than doing, sharing and sharing experience and sharing insights and making sure that things really honestly happen. So should we stay in our comfort zone and to create more of new methodologies? Yes, we need to, but more importantly, we need to roll up our sleeves, be brave, and to start doing and to do the second, third, and fifth step in order to make things happen, to localize the tools and to implement them. So beyond just piloting things, really deploying them. So I would like to take a look forward and to look at sort of 3 levels of commitment and engagement: the personal commitment, the organizational commitment, and the role in community. And I think all 3, if we take those steps at those 3 levels with what we have and considering the new circumstances, the challenges and opportunities that the health crisis had brought to us, I think we can make a great step forward. So at a personal level, I think first we need to look for the tools that do exist and adapt them and use them. So as I said, there are some new circumstances, but the first step is the personal step. I personally, and each of us personally, take a commitment to do. The second, at institutional level, is that patient engagement isn't yet, and we know that from a recent DIA session where we've asked this question to participants representing various stakeholders, patient engagement is not yet necessarily always part of the institutional and organizational culture. And I think that is a step that each of us can trigger within our organizations to start putting this as a part of the of SOPs and to use the tools and to implement those tools as part of internal SOPs. We have also a third level of responsibility. This is the level of responsibility at our community level, our own constituents, our own stakeholders groups, where we need to inform and disseminate, but more importantly, and that also came out of our DIA session a few weeks ago, to share learnings. Because it's by sharing learnings that we are making sure that the tools become a norm and a practice. So just a few final remarks from me to exemplify what it meant for us as an organization, for FPA as a federation of pharmaceutical companies. First, Paradigm, I think more than any other project, became a catalyst for us. It really sparked something in terms of patient engagement. And you would say, okay, what a federation like ours can do about patient engagement? Well, it can do a lot. So at a personal level, we made sure that every person within our organization actually has a patient engagement objective to support patient engagement to happen, not necessarily to engage with patients, although that as well, but to help patient engagement to happen. At the institutional level, we've created performance indicators to make sure that this actually happens, that we have a standard process by which we measure. We not only do, but we also measure what we do, and we see an improvement. And at community level, we are taking today the tools of Paradigm and implementing them in the FPA rules that all companies would be subscribing to. So we've taken these 3 steps, and I think that's what I would like to see with our patient engagement open forum going forward, is to be brave, take those steps and do things. So in summary, I think time to act despite the circumstances or thanks to circumstances, to learn from COVID lessons, take them forward when using in practice the tools that already exist, to adapt them and to share experience. And maybe the next patient engagement open forum is about those learnings, about what worked and what needs to be, how can we support each other in making those steps of implementing patient engagement open forum. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Magda. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, this pulling all these strands together, a lot of the thinking has happened over the last 5 years. It's not just Paradigm, it's been happening in a lot of quarters. So you've got a lot of tools for different stakeholder groups that already exist. They may not be perfect, but they already exist. And it's time, as you say, Magda, to actually start using them. And what I really like about what you were saying, Magda, is this sharing of the experiences. Not everything that we try is successful. We all know that. Some things work, some things don't work. But we can only learn as a community by being honest. It's this honesty round that Yvette brought up right at the beginning, is being honest about what's working well, which of these tools is really helping us move forward, and actually what needs adaptation. And we only find that by doing it, and we only find that out as a community by sharing the results of that doing it. And so I think that's a really good thought to leave us with as we go into the next section, which is really about thinking about 2021 and thinking about the open forum, the patient engagement open forum in 2021. And so we've heard a collection of stakeholders now, all bringing different perspectives, but we see some common themes emerging already from those different perspectives that have been shared. And we've had suggested already some solutions, some ways of taking things forward, not just reflecting on what's happened already, but thinking about how do we take the best and make it better and take it forward? And how do we start doing things today? And being responsible, as you said, Magda, being responsible for ensuring that cultures change within organizations. We as individuals have a role there, not just expecting organizations to change just on themselves, but also we have responsibility there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk us through step by step the co-creation process that we are about to go through. And I just want you to bear with me here because we're using a tool which some of you may have used before, but I'd never used this tool before. So I'd rather that we just concentrate on what is it that we're going to do, so that we can see how our ideas will build during the course of the next 40 or 50 minutes or so. So it's best if you're doing this on a computer. Obviously, we keep Zoom open. That's the way we're going to speak to each other. The chat's still open. And anything that you think of that you don't record into group map, you can still put in the chat. We may not have time to look at that live, but we will certainly look through the chat options and integrate that into whatever comes out of group map as well. So keep Zoom open, keep the chat open. So again, you're going to have difficulty on the mobile phone with this because there'll be a lot going on, but hopefully you're on computers and you can do this. So if you go on to the next slide, please, let me talk you through the process. You're going to be directed, after this slide, you're going to be directed to a link, which will take you into the group map system. And there you'll be asked to do a survey, but don't freak out, it's one question only. And the one question is, what is your stakeholder group? So that's just to give us a sense of who's contributing by stakeholder to the group map itself. And then the main part of the session is a text field where you answer this question. What is a challenge and a 2021 goal that we can address together? So just to be clear about this, it's not just developing a list of challenges. That'd be great if we had a list of challenges, but we actually want to get some substance behind what is it the Patient Engagement Open Forum can concentrate on within 2021 that helps us to get towards some goals to meet those challenges. So the example on this slide is, say that you're really interested in patient experience data, but you're as frustrated as the rest of us that it's really fragmented. People don't seem to have the same definitions of what they mean about patient experience data. There's a lack of alignment. And so you think that a 2021 goal could be to build clarity and structure regarding conversations, discussions about patient experience data, to start to bring that clarity together. So your entry into group map would be patient experience data. The challenge is fragmentation and lack of alignment. 2021 goal, build clarity and structure. So it might be something like that that you actually type into the group map system. And so we're going to give this a go. I can tell you, I've looked at some test versions of this. What we'll generate is a list at the end of the day, but let's take this step by step. So there's a link in your chat which will take you to group map. You'll have to enter your email address to get started, and then you'll be into the survey, which is one single question. So if you go ahead and do that now, please. And I'm doing the same, so I'm with you every step of the way. Okay, and I can see on the results slide, which you can, those of you in group map, you can press the results button at the bottom. And I can see you're all very busy entering your information. And I can see in the lead, patient representatives at the moment. And they're staying in the lead. Pharmaceutical industry second. Consulting agency and others are third. Academia. I'm very disappointed with the regulatory and HTA bodies. That's a low 2%. So anybody out there that represents a regulatory or HTA body, make sure that you complete this survey. And 0 policymakers. Well, that's interesting so far. I can't see the numbers shifting much. We'll give it another minute another minute just to make sure that you've logged in. Let me just add up these numbers. There's 100 people on group map and there's 155 attendees. So not everybody has managed to log in yet. So let's give it another couple of minutes. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to contribute. While we do that, while we wait for that, I'll just ask a question for Magda. Magda, you made a really good point earlier where you said, we've got the paradigm tools, we've got lots of other tools that have been created that are in different organizations. We have educational tools within UPATI. We have the guidance and the tools that are part of PFMD. Do you see a future where there will be a one-stop shop for these tools? Or do you think that we need all of these different avenues for reaching tools?
It is an interesting question. I think we need to admit that there is of course, in an ideal world, you would have just one place where you go. But the reality is that we all look in different places depending on who we are and what community we are. I would go to those places which I visit as a professional in my constituency. But what I would like to have is to be directed at a place where the tools somewhere are in a cloud where they can be improved and maintained with the appropriate level of quality, some sort of a reference place. But I think it is normal that there are many places through which you transition because we are all going through our normal ways of looking for information. I don't know if that helps, but
it does, and it's interesting because we had this dilemma. So we at HJI was involved in the paradigm work, particularly on some tools for HJA bodies. And from the very beginning, we realized that HJA bodies would not naturally have heard of paradigm and know that there was a website called Paradigm where they could get the tools. And so we made the decision quite early on that any tools that we created as part of Paradigm would also sit and be mirrored on the HJI website, because we knew that HJA bodies do come to the HJI website. So it's a really good point that we need to think about where people naturally go to get their information and make sure that we have that information replicated as much as possible if we can't have a single cloud-based tool that contains everything. Thank you, Magda. I can't see the numbers changing very much. I'm just going to check here. We've got a CRO category missing from here. So that's a catch for next time. So Anita, we will be obviously capturing that in the chat that we have people here from the CRO community. I can see that there's currently 110 people, 115 people now on group map, which does not match our attendee list, 153. But in the interest of time, I am going to move on to the next section because I think the next section is where it's hard, and we need to think about, each of us needs to think about this section. So, oh yes, sorry. There you can see the screen I was looking at on the side now, just in case you couldn't find it. So you can see that we have the winners in terms of participation here, if there are winners, is the patient representative, patient advocate, and patient organization, with the pharmaceutical industry a very close second. It is disappointing, I saw it in the chat, it is disappointing that we don't have policymakers here. And so that's maybe something that we can look at into the future about how do we encourage more policymakers to engage with the Patient Engagement Open Forum. And we do see that we do have regulatory HTA bodies and a small number of individual patients as well. And so that's good to see that. Diagnostic and medtech industry, quite low, but I guess that's understandable in that a lot of the focus of the work to date has tended to focus on medicines development rather than device development, though that's changing a lot, it's changing really fast. And we have others, so we don't know who those others are. But thank you very much for doing that first step That was just the warm-up step, because now we get on to the bit that takes a little bit of thought. So I'm going to talk you through this before we bring people into the brainstorm. So we've pre-populated this with some ideas to start with. So just a reminder, you get one field to fill in. So it's not several questions. So you have one text that you can do, and you can only do it once. That means that you have to think really carefully, what is the challenge and the 2021 goal that I think is most important that is not already on this list? Because once you've entered something in, you won't be able to enter a second thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't contribute if you have lots and lots of ideas. So what happens with this is that although you can enter one new element into the group list, you can vote on as many elements that you agree with. And that's a little thumb on the right-hand side that you can see here. So it means that save your actual text for something that you don't already see. If you see something that you think, yeah, I think that's really important, then vote for it, and then think about what your additional challenge and goal for 2021 would be to add to that list. And so we will see this populate in a moment as you all start typing. So once again, it's not just a challenge we want the challenge and an idea of what a 2021 goal would look like that Patient Engagement Open Forum could start thinking about addressing as it plans out its activities for the rest of the year. Now you're all in here. So let's see what happens. So let's see what we've got here already. So we have things here about public-private models. That's the one that's rising to the top quite quickly. And again, Stuart, I'll just ask you a question about this, because you were also involved with Paradigm, which was a public-private model. So what do you think are the lessons from your perspective, from the research community's perspective, of being involved in these public-private models? Now, are there any experiences you can share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. That's a really good question. I mean, my reflection on I've been involved in two. I was involved in a previous one, Adapt Smart, which I know Magda was also involved in, and a few others as well. I have nothing but positive experiences from being involved in these public-private partnerships. I think from the research community, you know, it's very easy to just collaborate with your partners, with your department, or across your departments, or possibly just with one other stakeholder. And so it answers a set of research questions, but I'm always left thinking, well, you know, have you really gone far enough? So the platform of these public-private partnerships gives, you know, unprecedented access to all the stakeholders that you need to answer your research questions that you just would not have within a normal research context. And also I think that the geographical spread as well, again, that you would not necessarily have within the normal research context. You may be restricted to the city that I'm in Oxford, or just, you know, the south part of the country, you know, really has been its global access to these. So the breadth of the knowledge and the experience and the skills from all the stakeholders involved is absolutely invaluable to really understanding the breadth of the issues, but also understanding the breadth in the approaches and to understanding and solving those problems as well. I think that has also been absolutely fundamental to understand. Actually, there are many more ways to solve one problem than perhaps you might understand from a fairly sort of closed and sort of insular way of doing the research. So yeah, I think it's absolutely valuable, and it really does challenge you to think in a different way and find those solutions in a different way as well. So yeah, very positive.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Thanks, Stuart. And a second thing that I'm seeing, I keep seeing this word as we scroll through these about this inclusiveness and diversity. And Yvette, this really resonated with me, and some of the comments you made in your presentation. where you said, we've been able to include more people, we've been able to have more diversity. When you're thinking about the youth group, the Epf Youth Group, sort of when you think about that diversity, what does it give you as a group to have such diversity?
Well, thank you, Neil. We are definitely diverse in terms of our age as well. We have people going to high school, and we have the older ones like me who are already working. So it's what's giving me is thinking out of the box. So it's really like having the new perspective, in the one that is not as used to thinking within the box, is definitely something. And another thing, geographically, we have a member from Serbia and we have one from Germany. So we see the whole range, any topic that comes up. For example, we had a project on employment, and seeing the diversity is really valuable in providing actual results that can be adopted to different regions of Europe and not only the well-researched ones.
So in terms of even just generating the ideas and the activities that the youth group does, having that diversity lets you open your mind really to different sets of possibilities. I guess that's what you're saying, and sense check what would work in different environments and whether you're being too focused on your own experience.
Exactly, to make sure that these ideas can actually contribute and can actually be implemented in different settings.
Yeah, that's good. That's a really good point. Crystal, I'm going to go to you for the one that's coming up top. So with 32 votes so far, which is about personalized medicine and whether, reshaping the patient journey around personalized medicine. Is that something that Faster Cures has been grappling with? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
And I actually clicked the unmute button, but it apparently didn't work. I'm the first to be admonished for not unmuting myself. I don't know if this is something I can say we've been directly grappling with, but I do. I think we see it more as a focus and a concern for maybe patient communities that had not been focused on it previously. This, what does personalized medicine or precision medicine mean in our context? I guess I can say that maybe we have kind of looked at this issue in the context of cell and gene therapies. In particular, that's a big focus for us right now. And I think, and for many patient communities, where they hold a lot of promise, but they are also very challenging to develop and can be very expensive to access if and when we've actually been successful at developing them, and they present all kinds of challenges in terms of long-term follow-up and data collection. But as we've been doing that work, I think we've actually been developing a patient journey map for communities in the area of cell and gene therapy, and are coming to realize that this, in this area in particular, the personalized medicine and a personalized patient journey are extremely relevant in terms of the diagnostic odyssey, as people refer to it, and certainly the long-term management of the disease, which is kind of called out here. So I don't know if that's responsive to the question, but.
No, that's really helpful. That's really helpful, Kristen. And I think it's interesting that we're thinking about how all of this new technology will reshape the patient journey. And then when I try to link that to the patient engagement open forum, I guess the key question for me is how patients are involved in that reshaping of the journey. So it's not just the technology that's reshaping the journey, but it's actually how do we ensure that it's not just the technology that's reshaping the journey, but actually the patients are partners through that reshaping, if that reshaping happens. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, no, that's good. I'm just looking through the list here. I think what was interesting, so moderating this and looking at this list at the same time, I've not been able to enter my own entry, but if I could have entered my own entry, I would have expanded on the one about diversity and inclusiveness in clinical trials, and said, what are we going to do about diversity and inclusivity in patient engagement? You know, it's, you know, how do we make sure that our patient engagement itself is diverse and inclusive? And that's an area that you touched on as well, Yvette, in your opening, that actually some of the tools that have happened through COVID help with that diversity and inclusivity. And Yvette, if there was, you know, maybe this is a difficult question to answer, but if there's one element that you think could be taken forward, or you'd love to be taken forward into the new post-COVID world that we're yet to experience, what would that be?
Yeah, difficult question, Neil. Well, I think being meaningful with the space we choose, whether it's face-to-face, virtual, or hybrid, and whenever it's possible and whenever we see the value in it, stream events which you wouldn't have streamed before 2019, because I don't think the technology didn't change as much. I mean, we can now put in backgrounds in Zoom and stuff, the little stuff, but we had Zoom previously as well. We just gained a trust in people that they can actually use, that they have the skills to use it, most people. And of course, this is not inclusive with all as well, to keep this trust, really.
Yeah, making sure it's always meaningful, no matter which engagement methods, and making sure that it's respectful and builds trust. And that's interesting, because I'm just looking at the list here and I can see a few mentions of the word trust here. So how can we build collaborative private models related to big data in this case with patients to address trust and fragmentation issues? And I know that there's a digital element in the agenda for the next 2 days on the Patient Engagement Open Forum. So this is coming up in various ways across the different elements here. I just want, Stuart, I noticed there's one here about you know, understanding the different methodologies of engagement. I can't see it here. It was here on my list a while ago, but it very much reflected the points you were making. And I just wonder if you can expand on a few of those. When you talk about the difficulties in governance and privacy and power and which kinds of engagement models are best for which kinds of things, what do you think it is that we need to do from a research perspective? I know you said we need to research it, but what are the basic questions we're trying to answer with that research?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Good question. I think it's several folds, really just trying to understand. I mean, you have a contextual issue here as well. So, you know, what is the context that you're having a patient engagement in, and understanding that context can change in a face-to-face environment versus a virtual environment. I think we've already touched upon the sort of issue of sort of power dynamics, for example. You know, we're sitting here, you know, at the moment I'm sort of talking to a blank screen. You know, so on one side of things, I can feel very included because there's another 160 people on the call. In the other sense, I could feel quite isolated, that I feel alone and it's me against another 160 people rather than being part of that community. So there's a sort of contextual issue about how the dynamics of those interactions happen, and understanding which is the most important elements to pick up on, and which are most optimal for the question that you're utilizing and trying to answer here. I guess you then have to consider about the populations or type of patients that you're involved here. I think Yvette picked up on the sort of language element of this as well earlier on. So for example, if English is not the first language, what a set of methodologies or a way of interacting that may just about work in a face-to-face environment, where you can read body language, you can lip read, you can pause, you can write things down, you can put that in a virtual environment, and that can break down, where you have a large cognitive load. It's more difficult to pause. There's background noise. I can't see where your eyes are, Neil. I don't know where you're looking. I don't know if you're engaged with what I'm saying. I can see you're smiling now, but I can't see if other people are smiling. Are you responding to my jokes? Do you understand what I'm saying? And can you? So I think there are lots of contextual things that we need to understand, which would then help guide us. What is the best method, and which is and what questions are we asking? And really, you can either imagine a series of best practices, or possibly even sort of like a fairly broad sort of matrix style of what are the questions, what are the contexts, what are the patient populations, what might be the best set of methods to use for my engagement activity there. So and then you think of things around the sort of the whole about governance and privacy. Yeah, again, it opens up a whole set of new questions around invite people coming into your own personal space. We have sort of full screens for the back of us, but you are coming into someone's life. You're coming into their house. You can't necessarily help if people wander in and out. You can't. So that I think there's things that we can do to better understand it and make sure that that those don't become issues, that they are dealt with in the correct manner, and so it can be that the whole experience can be really, really optimal and meaningful and impactful. So there's a few things there. Does that help?
That's a long list. That's a long list that we
can
need to.
Can I add one element to that, Neil?
Yes, sure, Magda.
Can, and it's really, I would like to come back to this sharing of experience, because I think we don't, none of us believes that we are going back to what the practice was before the health crisis. The health crisis has profoundly changed our way of working and of interacting. So there is no back, and it would be different. And I think that's why it's so important that we communicate, exchange more, and share our experience with those tools and adapt them more. And I think this is a positive trend. I see it as Stuart, I think positively. We need to research that and to find what impact will be, but we should share first and foremost our experiences with those tools, so that we don't live in that illusion that it would be back to what the situation was before. Because even our traveling patterns are changing today, our meeting patterns are changing today, so there is no back. We just need to adapt now positively and together to the new circumstances.
Yes, so it's moving forward from here. I just want to
Neil,
give people.
Oh,
yes,
sorry. Do you mind if I just contribute one quick comment on Magda and Stuart, which is that, and also something Yvette referenced earlier, which is that it occurs to me that as we're moving into a more hybrid way of doing things, which I think everyone expects is at least in the near term part of our collective future, that introduces some also very interesting questions about power dynamics and what how to ensure that everyone is equally engaged. When some are together in person and some are participating virtually. I feel like I'm wrestling with that already, even though we haven't gotten there yet, but that will also be interesting.
It's a really good point, Kristen. And in the work that I do at HTAI, this has come up quite a lot, where there's been the virtual world has allowed committee meetings, HTA decision-making committee meetings to happen virtually, which makes it much easier to have patient involvement at those committee meetings. But what we also hear anecdotally is that you lose the power of having patients in the room. They are in the room, they're in the virtual room, but there's an additional thing that happens when patients sit in the same room as the committee members and the chair of the committee, and everybody can see each other. And there's a worry, what do you lose by just having it this pure virtually? Are you losing an element of interaction that's really hard to quantify? So I think we see that on so many different levels in all of the meetings that we're in. So really, really interesting questions. Now I'm just looking through the list now before we move on to the next section, which will be a vote on this. But we'll get there. I just want to give a moment to can ask everybody to look through this list. If you think something is important and you haven't voted for it yet, then please do put a vote on it. It really helps us give some clear direction to the patient engagement open forum process going forward. And if you've not put your new line of text in, because it's been covered already, that's fine. But if you have a burning thought that you think isn't correctly or quite, being captured here, then please do add it into the group map. We'll keep this open just for another minute or two, just to make sure that everybody has contributed. And while we give that another 2 minutes, I saw something here about young people, patient engagement training geared at adolescents and the young. So this came up, Yvette. So this is a classic one to pass to you when you think about, your experience and those within your youth group at EPF. What would have been fantastic to have at the beginning that maybe didn't exist, but you'd love there to be in the future?
Epf Youth Group, I haven't been there from the beginning, but I've heard a lot of stories. And in the past 10 years, it came a very, very long journey. So first, I hear stories about them being set into meetings, and it was all patient empowerment, patient engagement. And it took them a couple of years to actually understand what that means, because these words are usually not directly translatable to other languages than English, and it can be really hard to do that. But from that, now last year it was the 4th cohort of the summer training for young patient advocates, and they're every year, again, from very different conditions and from very different countries within Europe, we just all come together and learn together about the ethics of patient advocacy, how to represent the community, and we get the chance to make our own projects with the lead of our facilitators. So it's a wonderful training, really. What could be the future, though, is to get into like the model of UPATI. You have a central training and then you have national platforms. So maybe this kind of patient engagement, patient advocate trainings for the young could be worthy to be held in a country-specific manner. For example, in Hungary, if it was held here in Hungarian, we would have many more patient advocates, and it would keep them on the track, because we are losing a lot of young patients who are interested in advocacy, but they, for a number of reasons, they lose their motivation and don't follow. So if we want to build our futures within the countries as well, I think it would be worthy to create the youth groups and these kind of opportunities within countries as well.
Really good point. And yeah, just building, Magda, you mentioned earlier the amount of tools and guidance and support we have already. And what I'm hearing from you, Yvette, is that a really quick win is making sure that those guidances are in multiple languages. There's a growing list of multiple languages, so they already exist, and it's finding the time and the resources to translate those. I can see in the thread of the chat that in some cases people have put a sentence in and it's been changed or added to by other people. If you want to clarify your sentence, please do that in the chat. We will cross-check the chat with what's in Group Map. So as I said to you before, this is my first time using Group Map as well, and I'm sure it is for all of you. So so obviously it's possible to change what somebody originally typed in here. If you think the meaning of what you originally had in Group Map has changed, can you please just correct that on the chat? And we will collate those two elements together when we analyze this after this event. So sorry about that. Okay, so what we can see here, just to summarize, is that we have diversity in clinical trials, inclusivity and diversity in clinical trials. That's the #1 topic that's come up. We have this concept about reshaping the patient journey around personalized medicine, but as you said also, Kristen, it's also moving into this future of cell-based therapies and gene-based therapies, thinking about that patient journey and what does that mean and how is that going to change and how is patient engagement part of that change. building clarity and structure around patient experience data, really to address this idea that everybody's going in different directions. Everyone's talking about patient experience data in different ways, and there isn't yet broad alignment of even what we mean by patient experience data. So I think these are very clear guidances you're giving. The one about public-private models, but this time applied to big data with patients so that we can really address that trust and we can overcome fragmentation. And there's some other thoughts here about advertising to the patient community, or a website that is like a portal for all of these things. And of course, by paying people appropriately, you know, this comes up a lot. Investigating different methods, face-to-face, virtual, hybrid. We've discussed that in the panel as well, and thinking about what does that mean? What are the pros and cons of different methods? Patient engagement training geared towards adolescents and the young. And we heard some more from Yvette about how that could happen, and how that probably needs to have a country focus, not just an international focus. Medical devices, we've not mentioned this one before, it came up earlier, but you know, it's thinking about what this body of knowledge that we've developed at the moment, how does that translate into, and what's different, what needs to be adapted when you're thinking about medical devices? How do we take the medical devices community and people affected by medical devices with us on this patient engagement journey? And then we have the role of CRO in patient engagement during and after clinical development, and the role of patients in the governance of research and patient data. So again, this idea about data, you know, but this is patients in the governance, not just the governance of the research, but the patient data. So some really, really interesting, very different ideas in our top list there, but there are the long list that falls underneath that. So I'm going to suggest that we go to the voting stage now. And I'm just checking here if I can see the screen. So it looks like we have 2 votes. Just let me just look at my chat. So Elizabeth, on chat, is it 2 votes each? I just want to make sure I give the right instructions.
Yes, it is 2 votes each.
Fantastic, fantastic. So what you can see here is already you can see which things have scored high in terms of likes. So your likes have been really useful to help us focus our discussion as we discuss this list. But this is now, you know, if you know, when you want the patient engagement open forum steering committee to sort of look at these things, what are the 2 things you would vote for? So you don't have ultimate choice here. You have to think about this. The 2 things you would most like to take forward and have this, the patient engagement open forum steering committee consider how we address those going forward. So is the vote open? I'm just checking. Vote is open. Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm guessing it's this round button at the far right. Is that's the voting? But yes, you press the plus button there, and you have 2 pluses that you can do. And I'm just checking here because I don't see anything changing on the screen. So I'm assuming, Elizabeth, that the votes are secret until we close the voting. Is that right? And while we're doing that, so nobody can see the votes yet till we close it, but I just want to just pick on a couple of things I can see in the chat, which is duplication from Carol, duplication of effort by EMA, MHRA, and others. I think it's something that we all see, Carol. We see that the regulators are perhaps thinking about patient engagement, asking very similar questions that HTA bodies ask of patient engagement, asking similar questions that the industry asks of the patient community in order to understand living with a particular disease. And it's one of the things that I hear most when I work with patient organizations involved in HTA is how time consuming it can be to keep answering all these questions, especially when the questions are the same questions they get asked over and over again. And so I think you've hit on a point there, which is when we think about how we work across multi-stakeholder groups, we also need to think about how we ensure that everybody is respectful, that we're all going towards the same rationale, and that through that, we share as much as possible. To go back to what Magda was saying, actually sharing our approaches, our experiences of those approaches can help to avoid some duplication. I'm just checking. Give us more time to read through. Don't worry, I'm not closing the votes yet. You've still got time. Don't rush this. It's really important you spend the time. It's not allowing me to open the vote. So Nicholas, I'm just sort of thinking, you opened this session, now you can see the kinds of issues that are coming up here while we wait for the voting to happen. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Neil. So for me, just on the last piece about duplication, that's also, as you mentioned, something I hear quite often. And for me, it's great that many organizations initiate new initiatives, and actually for some of them, it's important that we make sure that we harmonize and we bring things together. One of the things that, and that's a caregiver that we talk now, but yes, I see just MHRA, EMA, and PEOF. And one of the things, if I speak as a caregiver, my son is 13 years old now. And actually, if I had to think about all the experience I would like to report, just to take the example of patient experience data, since we talk about that, I think to date, probably only 10 or 20% big maximum of the experience we would have to report would be meaningful for regulators. The experience we would have to report will be meaningful actually for many other stakeholders as well. So while I think it's super important that some stakeholders lead some changes and the regulator is key, I think it's important that we don't center all our initiatives on the stakeholder itself, the regulator in this case. So it's really important to step back and to have a perspective from the patient. And I think that will be one of the difference between these initiatives and PEOF. With PEOF, we really aim to onboard all stakeholders, and I have taken the point on the policymakers or the CROs, but that the goal is really to make sure that we have all the perspective, all the one we managed to make happen at least, and take a truly holistic centered approach around patients. So that's just one of the observation I could do. I'm also very pleased to see the focus on patient engagement in precision medicine and digital health. I'm looking forward for the final vote, actually. So thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm just doing a sense check with everybody, and is it possible for us to see whether people have stopped voting now? I don't know if there's a way before we close the vote. I just want to make sure that we've captured everybody's vote. And I know there's a few comments here, people have not been allowed to vote. Please use chat. If you're having problems with the system, say, I would have voted for. You can send it just to the panelists so that we see it. It doesn't have to be something that you share with everybody, but if you can find some way of telling us what you would have voted for if there's technical issues. I'm going to assume now, in the interest of time, that people have now voted. So let's go and see the results. Okay, so we have, the way this is displayed, by the way, is the bigger the font size, the more likes it had in the first part of the exercise when you were liking different things. The bigger the writing, the more likes it had. And the green number on the right-hand side is the votes and the relative, and obviously the order is related to the votes here. So let's have a look. So we have this thing about inclusivity and diversity, particularly in clinical trials, came up quite high at the top for a lot of the time when we do likes, and it's come up really high at the top now that we have the voting. Build clarity and structure around patient experience data. So getting that conversation more aligned, that's come up high as well. And it had a high number of likes the first time around. Create a forum where patients and researchers can meet in an informal way to allow stakeholders to become comfortable with each other. That's a really interesting one, because that I didn't see that one further down the list before, but that scored highly on the votes. And this building a collaborative public-private model around big data to address these issues of trust and fragmentation. So making sure that it's proper patient engagement, that it's properly collaborative there. Okay, I can see there's still people on the chat who are having problems. They weren't able to access the vote. And I really sort of, if you just let us know what you would have voted for, then we can collate those figures afterwards. I'm sorry that you're having technical issues there. I think how the pharma industry works and includes patient and clinical trials, trial design and implementation. And I know there were additions to that one afterwards, but as a general concept, thinking about that, investigating different methods. We've had that one. Sorry, my watch is now calling me. Okay. Reshaping the patient journey. So you can see there's a lot of alignment between what you liked and what you actually voted for, but some differences as well, which is interesting. So what we're going to do is take all of this information. It's not that these votes are set in stone. We actually take the information that you've given us on the chat. But I'm going to, I think it's really interesting. I'm going to pass to the panel briefly for comments on what you've seen come up at the top here before we pass back to Nicola to close this particular session of the meeting. So Yvette, you kick us off today. So I'm going to go to you first. When you look at the top things on this list, how do you reflect on that?
Thank you, Neil. Well, I really like that we co-created this list. So just that fact makes me happy today.
Fantastic. And Kristen?
I also I'm really enjoying this tool despite some technical challenges people may be having with it, but this is a wonderful way to start the conversation. I mean, I'll just reflect on a couple of the points that seem to have risen to the top here. And one thought I've had about this conversation around the inclusiveness and diversity that we really haven't highlighted is that in addition to being the right thing to do for all of us to try to make sure that we're being inclusive and diverse, the diversity of our patient communities and populations, I think there's a recognition, particularly on the industry side as well, that we won't get to the right answers if we're not inclusive and diverse. That if that we may be leaving. I've heard someone say we may be leaving good science on the table if we're not making sure that we are doing research with the people and communities that are most impacted in a particular condition. And then there are a couple of points here that kind of revolve around the importance of patients, having the patient community at the center of all of this work. And I think they are uniquely situated to help build trust, to be, sort of the honest brokers for patient engagement and participation. They are trusted by patients in a way that maybe other actors in the system are not, and that they have an interest in helping address the fragmentation across academic research and companies and regulatory bodies. And ultimately the patient communities are the ones that have the greatest stake in making sure this all goes well and getting to results. And I think that's become a real force, I would say, in the last decade or more. That's been extremely positive, and I think excited to see that kind of continue with the types of tools and resources that we can develop here together.
Yes, no, and long may it continue. And Stuart, when you think about the things towards the top of this list, how does that sit with you?
Yeah, indeed. First of all, yeah, I agree. I love this group map. I'm definitely going to use that in all my conferences moving forward. I think that's great what it shows. So I think to pick up the first point about this, yeah, increasing the inclusiveness and diversity, I agree with this sort of concept of you know, you're missing some really good science and research here. So the parallel that I would draw is the sort of disproportionate effect that sort of COVID-19 has had on certain communities, and how we fail to understand how they're impacted. So that's an obvious parallel that we can learn for the clinical trials. But then also I see that link as well with the sort of also a sort of shift to remote clinical trials as well, and how that can be incorporated here. And I think there's lots of opportunities to pick up on that. And then the other one that I would just touch upon that I do find interesting is the one a little bit further down about this whole sort of real world data and big data stuff. I mean, the whole sort of big data has been on, you know, various agendas for a number of years now. It's still evolving, but, you know, I have to say it's something that gets, you know, very complex very quickly. And I think that's confusing and can be off-putting for a lot of people. So I think understanding that with patients and addressing, you know, a lot of those fragmentation issues is really important to ensure that that whole agenda moves forward in the correct manner there. So those are my two.
Perfect. And Magda?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not surprised at all because it's very consistent. The three or four top things is about diversity, so inclusivity and making sure nobody is left behind, the clarity of roles and responsibilities to make sure that we are not getting overloaded with the same questions along the lines, and a proper forum for public-private collaboration and engagement. These are all very consistent things, and conditions for a meaningful engagement that respects the time of everyone. I'd just like to say two more things. One is that there is no one model of public-private collaboration. There are many models of public-private collaborations, and we need to think about patient engagement in those various models because one size doesn't fit all. The tools can be localized for any of those, but the models are very different, and rightly so. So let's just bear that in mind. And the second is that all of that just tells me that PEOF has a long life to live and a role to play in addressing these questions together in such an inclusive way as we've done today. Excellent.
Good. Great point to leave us on. And I would just thank everybody that's been involved in this. And especially the people, not just the people on our panel who have been fantastic in really drawing out some of the issues behind some of these topic areas, but all of you that have attended today and that have spent time going through this group map and building it with us. But I'm going to hand over back now to Nicola to talk about the next steps from here.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a great session. So yes, what we will do with this first discussion. So I mentioned earlier that consultation was actually the lowest level of co-creation. And actually we have done a bit more than consultation today, but that's only the beginning. So basically, we will look at these results. As per some comments, we will also look at these results taking into account the response from different stakeholder groups and to see if there are differences per stakeholder group. And actually, we will, so first of all, we'll share this information with you. We'll share this information with the program committee, but then we will ask you to suggest ideas based on the program. And when I'm meaning ideas, it's like if you want to come because you have a project, because you have an initiative and you want to use this co-creation platform to have a session where it's not only about to showcase a case study or an initiative, but actually to come and engage the audience of the patient engagement open forum. That's really what we are looking for. And so that's you, our community, that will help us shape the program and the content according to the agenda that we have discussed today. We will also ask you to, not only in the case you have an initiative, but in the case you know a champion on one of these topics, a champion as a person, a champion as an initiative, that should definitely be part of PEOF or to be actually engaged with PEOF moving forward. So thank you very much to all of you. Also, thank you to the sponsors. One of the key elements of this conference is that there is absolutely no barrier to entry, not even a list or a form to fill in to have a chance to have a seat. And that's because of the sponsors that have been helping us on that front. All patients, all stakeholders can engage at no cost. And that's a really important point when we talk about diversity, as an example, or minorities. So as a next step, very quick next step, we will send you a survey about this session. Usual survey after online conferences, except that we add a chapter on engagement. What was your experience about the tools? The question we ask, can you help us make it even better in virtual engagement with 150 people? We also will actually ask you to share your initiatives in Synapse, the software you have been registering for the conference. You can share your tools, your initiatives, and your programs there, so actually everybody can access it very easily. It's fed by the community as a platform. And then I just will finish with the agenda for the next session right now and tomorrow. So measuring whether it's one initiative, whether it's all initiatives within your organization, whatever purpose you want to use it for, how to measure patient engagement, and you will help us define, okay, what tools we need to help monitoring better moving forward. So that's a session that will happen just now in 10 minutes. And tomorrow, how to connect patients to digital health and the patient experience data. We have great panels with patients from all over the globe. We have regulators, we have academics, we have clinicians as well on the panels. So really great perspective again to discuss this topic and try to see how we can make it work for all stakeholders in one place. And last but not least, I will just bounce on Magda's point. As we develop this new tool, as we discuss patient engagement, you can always engage already now and practice using the tool as they are. And at the end, patient engagement or engaging with the other stakeholders, it's just a matter of organizing a meeting, a session, and interacting with them to start the dialogue. And so in the meantime, please engage, and let's see you in 7 minutes in the next session or tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much.